Okay, so yep, to finish off, what we're going to do today is we're going to do one more example of getting a tool, but now we're going to do like an ArcGIS type example. Okay, we're going to do something fairly simple, but still going to implement ArcGIS and operate on GIS data. Then what we're going to do is set up or start the assignment, because the assignment is going to be to take last week's assignment and make a toolbox for it. So, and some basically there is on Canvas now there is a place to submit both this week's, the one that's due tomorrow technically, and then the one after that. I just created that, so I know that there were some questions about that. Okay, so we're going to keep it fairly simple, but I'm going to save this as 6.3, and then we're going to modify this a bit, and we're going to do it the way that that I said we should do it, and that is that we're going to create our tool so that it runs outside of ArcGIS first, and we get it working, and then we try to run it inside of ArcGIS. So the first step is save this as example 3. Okay, and then let's actually utilize the data. What data? We use that Mississippi data. Now we'll use, well, let's see if I have. What data do we have from last week? I unzipped it all somewhere. I put it in, I should have remembered where I put it. Let's just download it again. So if we go back to lab 5, this way we all have the data. So if we want to get it working. So it's called lab data. I'm going to put this into my ctemp directory. It doesn't matter where you put it because you'll have to reference it. Okay, I didn't see it in there, but I guess I was right. So I put it in ctemp. Let's just make sure that it's there. Ctemp lab data. There it is. Okay, so it's got the C tracks and the watershed. So I'm going to write a simple tool that that just does an intersect and then a dissolve, but we're not going to do any of the other steps that we did last week. So this is just a simple tool, intersect and a dissolve, and the dissolve will be based on a user inputted field, so that it's helpful to the user. Okay. And also so that you understand how that works. That's the obtained from parameter that we talked about earlier. Okay, so I don't even need to load these in here because I'm going to do that over here in the code. So I'm going to change my code a little bit. So this is 6.3. I'm just going to call this input 1 and input 2, and those are going to be the parameters. Okay, so I can go ahead and store the default values right here. Because if it's blank, it's going to be this, and if it's not blank, it's going to be this. So my default values now are going to be the paths to those locations. So I'm going to change this so that I'm going to go back into ArcGIS. Open up our toolbox and go to ctemp, or not our toolbox. our catalog, lab data, and I can copy that whole path. And I can do that for watersheds. If you want, you could just type that path, but I think it's easier to do that. To navigate to it and copy and paste it. Then you know it's right. You know it's there. So these aren't A and B anymore. I need to change those to look like this. In previous years, and this is still valid, oh, these need to be 2. In previous years, I would comment this out and put this right here. That's the way I taught it in previous years. Oops. In previous years, I would go like that, so that when I finally got it running, I would just delete from the comments over. Okay? But I actually think that the way we're doing it today, this time I'm teaching it, I think is better because you don't have to change the script at all. I'm going to leave these uncommented. So we're setting this up so that it'll run just fine this way. And then it will also run if you attach it, because now these will have variables. The only thing that I could see, the only problem I could see is if I truly had an optional value that would be different if I wanted to run it this way than it would be if I wanted to run it in ArcGIS. But I really don't see that as a big possibility. All right, we have to keep in mind the default values might actually be different than I said. So now this will run, except for this isn't any good. So I'll delete all this. I'm going to comment out this because I probably still want to add a message. All right, so the idea is that I want to take input 1 and intersect input 1 with input 2. I want to intersect those 2 data sets. And then dissolve on a field. So, I could type in, let's just do this the way I would normally do it. So, I could go arcpy intersect. I like to just go copy the help. You can do it here, but you could also do it in ArcGIS. You could go to the intersect tool, and you could go to tool help, and you could copy it from the example intersect analysis right here. So either one will work because this will be, this also is the intersect analysis. So we're going to copy that over to here. So it needs a list of inputs. So we need to modify this so that it is a list of inputs. So in our case, it's just going to be input 1, comma, input 2. Now, why isn't it going to be why don't we put these in quotes? Input 1 and input 2. Input 1 and input 2 are variables, and they store these values inside of them. Okay. So that's why we don't need to put them in. All right. So this is the output. and this is the join fields. We're just going to store let all the fields come through. All right, so the output, what should the output be? Well, if this is a layer we don't really care about, I don't think I've talked about it in this class. I know we talked about it in 418, but I'm going to talk about it in this class real quick. So in this class, you have a few places to put empty data that you just want to like use for a few minutes. There's a few places to put them. One is the Scratch workspace, which we did talk a little bit about last week. Okay, so we could get the environments, the Scratch workspace, the env.scratch workspace. But one that's even faster, but it only works for vector data, which this is vector data. Remember, raster data is like images and elevations, evenly spaced grid data. But vector data, so if it's vector data, you can use something called the in_memory workspace. And what that does is it doesn't even write it out to disk. It puts it in memory, and it stores it. I'm going to put an R in front of it. In memory, and then you just put the name of the file that you want to deal with. Well, you just have to give it a name. So I'm going to call it in memory and call it temp inter. How about temp int? It stands for temp intersect. I'm just going to go to the help on this. Well, if you put the R, it actually doesn't matter. I'm just going to look into help and see if they recommend one or the other. It looks like they're going either way. So it's fine. Either / works, it looks like. So there are a few things, like these are a few warnings. You can't create folders, obviously. You can't, if you're going to use it to create a very huge data set, rasters fall in that category almost always, but even if it was a vector, if it was really, really huge, you don't want to do that. So the intersect analysis, and the advantage of using in-memory, one of the advantages is it's actually a lot faster than using your hard drive. So that is the temporary data set. One of the other disadvantages is that you can't actually look at it and to make sure that it worked. You can't. There's no way to see the result. You don't have to worry about overwriting it though. Okay, so we did our intersect. Now we're going to do our output. Okay. Now this is one example where we'll have an output value because our output's going to be the result of this dissolve. This is one example where we're going to let the user specify an output without telling it it's derived. We're going to let the user say, this is where we want to save it. So we're not going to derive it. So we need to get it from the user. We need to get the output. Right now we don't have that. So even though it's an output, let's write one more variable up here and say input 3. Sorry, let's just call it output. Output, and we're going to call this get parameters text. Actually, I'm going to say 3 because I'm going to have another one right here. I'm going to go ahead and put this one right here. So input 3 is going to be, I'm going to put a little comment off here that says what each one is. So the first one is going to be the first feature class data set. Second one's going to be the second feature class data set. The third one is going to be the dissolve field. The fourth one is going to be the output location for the feature class, the output feature class location. Okay, so now I've got some notes on what each one of them are. And I need to actually set some defaults up here in order for this to work. So let's do this for the rest of them. Let's dissolve on, I forgot what all the names of the fields are, but we could look at those real quick in ArcGIS. Huck_8, that's a good one. We're going to dissolve on Huck8. So that's the field that we'll dissolve on. All right. So now we've fed it all the information that we need to feed. So this needs to be changed to watersheds. This is going to be the output. What are we going to call the output? I'm just going to call it output. Not very originative, but since we're not really doing something, significant, we're just going to call it output. Don't have to put what? Sorry. I copied and pasted too much. This needs to be 2. Is that what you were saying? Okay, great. I don't really need an R here because there's no special characters. It's not going to hurt anything. All right, so now we're going to run the dissolve tool. The dissolve tool is the second step. And so we could go to dissolve is under data management. You could Google it, but this time I'll go under generalization and hit dissolve. And hit tool help. So here's the syntax for running the dissolve tool. Just going to copy that. Okay, so if we went back and looked at the help, we could see what's happening. But this is the input, that's the output, these are the dissolved fields. And we're not going to mess with anything else. We're just going to delete it all. So I'll go ahead and get rid of it. And this all needs to be on the same line. So we'll go like that. I'm going to do word wrap because I guess you can't. Oh. I guess you can't do that. Okay, well, we're going to make these smaller anyway. What's our input here going to be? The input to the dissolve. After we do the intersect, we're going to dissolve on the output of the intersect. So what does it need to be? Exactly. So we need to feed it this. All right, now this is going to be a lot smaller because now this is just going to be output. And then instead of this, we're just going to change this to the name of the field that we want to dissolve on. And that's going to be input 3. Exactly. All right? So we're dissolving it. That output's already going to be there. We can actually take that output file and feed it right into this set parameter as text as instead of 2, we're going to feed it this output value. And by the way, I didn't talk about this, but there are some cases where you do this, but almost always you're going to be passing things back and forth as strings. There is a tool called setParameter, not as text, just setParameter. And there is one called getParameter where there's no as text either, where you just get the parameter. And in those cases, it will actually give it to you as a object if it was intended as an object. So it'll actually give it to you as a Python data type, as that data type. So if you gave it, if it was a list of values, it would give it to you as a list instead of giving it to you as a string that needs to be converted into or a number that needs to be converted into a string. See, there might be some case where you use this, but this is almost always using setParameter, not setParameter text. It's more advanced, beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about in this class, to use just setParameter, not setParameter text. All right, so this should work. We're going to go ahead and test it by running it. What is C? Oh, you're right. Ah. I did that wrong. This is actually the number. So this would be 0, 1, 2, 3. This will be the 4th thing. No, wait. Actually, we don't even need this. Sorry. The set parameter is only for derive. We're deriving it, so we need to set it. We're not deriving any parameters now. We're letting the user specify where they're going to put it. If we were always going to put it, let's say our script was always going to put it in the same directory where the inputs were, then we can make it derive and then just put it there. But we're going to let the user choose it. Okay? We're going to let the user pick it, so we don't actually need to derive it at all. Thanks for catching that. Okay, so that's our script. It's pretty short. I'm going to try to run it right here and see if it works. It should work. I think as soon as the script's done running, it gets rid of that in memory. But I do want to test it. I'm going to try to run it twice. So it ran once. Let's see if it created that file. So inside of this thing, if we refresh it, we should see that. There's output right there. And it looks right. It looks like it's been dissolved by watershed, by Huck number. So we can delete it. And I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And I'm going to try to run it one more time just to see if I need to get rid of that in-memory workspace or not. I don't think I do, but I forgot whether or not it holds on to that. Okay, so I don't. I was right. Now, if it did hold on to that, I might just need to include an override output up here. Okay, we learned about that last week. Typically, though, I don't like to put my override outputs in tools that are going to be run as a toolbox. I like the user to be able to specify whether or not they want to overwrite outputs. So when a script runs in a toolbox, it uses the environmental parameters that are being included. So like when we run this as a tool in our toolbox, those environmental parameters that we set, it accepts those. So in other words, if you go in here and you run this tool from ArcGIS, you guys have run tools from ArcGIS before.
So it pulls all your geoprocessing environments automatically.
Right, so if I hit dissolve and I hit tool help, I'm sorry, and I hit environments here. If I go in and, well, you don't set that here, but if I set the workspace, for example, it takes this workspace. That's the workspace that it uses in the script. So there's not an awful lot of times where you're actually going to be setting environment parameters for tools that you're running in ArcGIS, unless you really want to force it to be something, no matter what the user picks. Does that make sense? So if you can choose to override anything, but then the user may get frustrated because he's like, I set environment parameters, I set it up right, I set my workspace, and then put it in a different location. If your script tries to override it, you can read these parameters, but if you're trying to make it run inside of our toolbox, it's best to just read those parameters because you might end up frustrating the user of your tool. Unless you're always going to be the user of your tool, then you can do it. So, does that make sense? Like these parameters, you can force them to be something else through arcpy.env.workspace equals, and you can set it equal to something else. But these are the values that it'll use by default. Now, if you just run it from IDLE, these values will be blank. So you have to keep that in mind. If your tool is a tool for running from the command prompt or running from IDLE, like it's just some script that you want to run once a day and do something, yeah, you will need to set up the environment parameters. But if it's a tool that people are going to be utilizing in ArcGIS, then don't set up those values. Don't set up those values because you'll be overriding them. So anyway, yes, it will just use in our case, it'll just use this value right here. I already have override outputs checked. So now when I try running this, when I create a toolbox for it, ArcGIS knows that I want to be able to overwrite that output. So I don't need to specify it in the script. It'll use it. So anyway, that's another, I guess that's another kind of falls into best practices thing. For testing, another thing for testing is if I get it working outside, let's say I do have a bunch of environmental parameters that I want set, I could once I actually implement it, I can comment all those out. And that way, the environment parameters wouldn't be overridden inside of ArcGIS. All right. Okay, so this works. Now it's time to get it working inside of ArcGIS. Now, this is going to be a little bit different, but not much. It's still the same basic process. What we're going to do is, inside of our toolbox, we won't recreate a toolbox, we'll just keep using the same one. We're going to create another script tool, and then we're going to specify all the parameters. I'll close this. Where did I put the? Oh, there it is. So that's my whole script. Anybody else trying to run it? Get in there. You did it the second time? Yeah. So the output already exists. There's no big deal about it. That's why I did it. Yeah, so above that, it says that the data set is not exist. I mean, you're sure that that's the right path? Right. But this file, no, give our that.
You get it to work?
never run. Oh, I guess. See, this says ABB. Those need to be changed to. Oh, wow. The reason why that took me a little while is because this is new to this year. I just thought of it. Okay.
I'll put mine.
Not out before it's out. Yep. There you go. Now try running. I did it with Just a little intersect analysis right there. Looks better now. Did it die again? Oh, so that's because you got the C in there, some C right there. Yeah, take that out. That's going to be. Right now you can. We do need that for later, but it needs to look like this. That line. Oh, no, sorry. That one, yeah, we need to take that totally out. That doesn't even need to be there, that whole line. Yep. I'm gonna, before we add this in as ArcGIS, I'm gonna add a message right here and right here. And just write something simple like intersecting input 1 plus input 2. So now it's just going to provide a message that it's doing that. And then I'll put another message that says, I'm not going to get as fancy here. I'm just going to write dissolving. So now what it's going to do is tell us that it's intersecting those two layers, and then it's going to dissolve them based on the input layer.
Dr. Rayburn?
Yeah.
When you were creating the toolbox, you got to edit it, so I haven't created the toolbox. Does
No.
that mean that this script will or will not run since it's not able to get any parameters?
Well, okay, so that's what I was trying to explain. In years past, I would actually comment all these out and put the default values in. Okay, but this time, I just tested to see if this works, and it does. So I set it up so that if these are all empty,
Then go through those if statements.
yes. And so now it will run either as a tool in our toolbox, or it'll run outside. It'll run either way.
Right. Okay.
That's the purpose for the if statements, so they can have the same script.
And what you just added was the add message.
Yeah, I just added the add messages. Now when I run that, when I run this outside of ArcGIS, I won't see the add messages. If I also wanted to see that, I would have to put a print statement with the exact same thing. In fact, it might be, this is something that you could do. I'm going to call this ArcPy print. Just for fun here. This is what I'm doing. Okay, I'm gonna type this up, and then yeah, capitalized. Yep. Oops. Hold on. I don't even want this one in here anymore. That's the old one. Okay. All right. Let's see if anybody can read what that code does. Provide a statement. What did I just do here?
Highlight which one you're talking about. I was typing.
I put this in, and then I called it. It's a function. I actually called it twice. I called it once here and once here.
So when they run the tool, they're going to get that pop-up window, and you're going to tell the user as it progresses where it is.
Right. Exactly.
And then those messages are going to print in Python too.
Right.
I guess normally they print.
Right. Exactly. So now I wrote a function that takes a string, just like ArcPy.addMessage does. It takes a string, and it not only outputs it to the Python pop-up window, but it also outputs it to the console, so that no matter if you run this in ArcGIS or if you run it standalone in IDLE, or even as a script in the script tool, you'll see the message. You'll see the message that shows up. So see, I'm gonna run it in here, and I think it's gonna fail because unless I refresh, if I delete this fast enough. Okay, I didn't delete it fast enough. So now I'm gonna try running it again. I just hadn't deleted the output. So now I deleted the output, and now I'm going to get these messages intersecting these two layers, and I'm going to get the dissolving message, dissolving based on Octave. So I get that message here, because sometimes print statements are useful. Or if I set it up and run it in ArcGIS, I'll still get those messages. It's just something that I just thought about doing. So anyway, it's a way to make it do both, but not have to type every single time. It's a classic reason for why you'd want to do a function. So now every time I don't have to put both a print statement and an add message statement and put the statement that I want to do twice. I only have to write the statement I want once and send it to this other function that will do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a toolbox called a script tool. So go under your toolbox, say add script. And I'm going to call this example 1 because it's the example. I'm just going to make the label the same. I'm going to make sure I click store relative path names, although it'll still run if you don't. But if, like, let's say you wanted to take this home and work on it, if you took the whole directory home, you could do it. All right, and then finally, we need to choose the file. So now, by now, this is 2018 example 6_3.py. Okay, so here's where we need to set up all the input values. Our first two are going to be really similar, but there are going to be some differences that I'll talk about. Let's open our script. So the first two are just going to be regular old inputs. They're going to be feature classes, though. So I'm going to call this one, I'm just going to call it input 1. It doesn't really need to be named input 1, but that's just what I'm going to call it. And, okay, so here we have just a ton of different things. I mean, some of these are used way more than others, but we can see on here that feature class is one of the things. A feature class is a vector ArcGIS data set. That's just what ArcGIS calls a vector data set. Feature class means points, lines, or polygon data set. All right. Now, typically, that's what you'd select, a feature class. But you could also select a feature layer. I'm going to tell you the difference here. A feature layer will allow you to choose something that's already loaded into ArcGIS. So if I choose feature layer, it'll allow me to choose from the layers. Interestingly, it will also allow you to load it from disk. If you choose feature class, it will only let you choose it from disk. So I almost always select feature layer. So either one of those will work. They're almost the same. But feature layer, what it'll do, it'll give you that little drop down right next to it. I'm just going to, you guys don't have to do this. I'm going to hit finish real quick. I'm going to hit this. And you can see there's no drop down right now, but if I had C-Tracks loaded and I hit this, see the little drop down I get, and I can choose from it? Okay, watch. If I go here, and I go to parameters, now I'm back to the screen you guys were at, and I take my second parameter, input 2, and I make it a feature class, and I say okay. Now watch, when I go to run this, I get the drop down here, even if I have watersheds loaded, let's say. I get the drop down here, and I can choose, I get the drop down, I can choose from the loaded layers, okay? But when it's a feature class, I can't choose from the loaded layers. I have to go choose it on disk. So that's really the only difference between a feature layer and a feature class. All right, so now if I go back to properties, I'm back where you were. I'm going to change this to feature layer for that reason that I just stated before. Feature layer. All right, now you might be tempted to use feature data set because that sounds like it should work. A feature data set is in ArcGIS, it's a group of feature classes. So it's kind of more like a folder is. It's a group of feature classes in a geodatabase. So you usually don't want to select feature data set. Okay. A feature set is like that allows you to interactively create a feature class. There's all sorts of different things on here, but there's dates, there's doubles, there's files. You can choose a file. For example, if you wanted to let the user select a file and the file had a list of all of the data sets you wanted to use, you could read the file and then use that. So you can write a tool that can access pretty much anything. All right. So what's the next parameter in our data set? We need the dissolve field. So the dissolve field, I'm just going to call this dissolve field. And we need to choose a field. Now again, you don't have to do this. I'm going to hit OK. And when I select this, my dissolve field is empty. Even if I select one of these fields, it's still empty. Not there. Okay? So what I want to do, I'm going to go back to this. What I want to do is under this obtained from, I want to change that. And I want to make obtained from. Why doesn't it let me choose a. Oh, I'm not on field. Okay, now I'm on field. Now I could say obtained from. And I could say I want to obtain it from the second group, whatever that is, the second shapefile. I can obtain it from the first shapefile or the second shapefile, but I'm going to obtain it from the second shapefile. So now when I do that, it will, I'm going to click OK here. Now when I try to run this, it will let me choose from whatever second. See, now I've got all the fields in the second shapefile. Oops, wrong button. Or the second feature class is technically what it should be called. Finally, I'm going to specify the output. And I want them to have to specify a feature class. This is a case where I cannot specify a feature layer, because a feature layer isn't actually a place on disk. It's one of these things. And this is an output. I'm writing this to disk, so I need it to be a feature class, not a feature layer. You can actually tell ArcGIS that you want the outputs automatically loaded, and it will create a feature layer, but you can't just give it a feature layer name, because you need to specify where on disk it's going to end up being. So under feature class, we need to change a few things. One thing is we need to change the the direction to output. It needs to be output. Actually, that is true, but watch what happens if I don't change it. If I try to run this, I'm going to say C-Tracks, watershed, and let's say I'm going to call this thing. I'm going to choose Huc8. If this ever works. Huc8. Look, see how it made that little. It's not going to let me run it. If I hover over that, it's going to tell me it doesn't exist or is not supported. Of course it doesn't exist. I want to create it. Well, because of ArcGIS's built-in error checking, because I specified that this is an input, it expects it to be there. So if I change that to output, now it doesn't expect it to be there anymore. It's the output file. All right. I could. It doesn't let me change the filter. Now I did tell you that you can choose a symbology by default. So if I chose a layer file that was symbolized, I would put that layer file in that resources directory that I was talking about earlier. So if you always knew that you wanted to have the output look a certain way, you could specify a layer file that was already symbolized that same way. The layer file, you would make that with a set of dummy data, and it would have to have the exact same field that you wanted to symbolize on. And then what it does, has anybody ever taken a layer file and changed the source to a different file? Well, you can do that. So this is done. I'm just going to hit OK. But watch this. So I have my watersheds here, right? I can take my watersheds and change this so that I'm going to change the source to a different data set. To the output, let's say. Okay. So now the watersheds, I just changed the data source. It's still symbolized using the same color, but I changed the data source. So if I made it red and I saved it as a layer file, then I loaded it into that properties over here. I loaded it into properties. I loaded it into symbology here. Then it would always be red every time I ran it. It would show up as red. Or if I symbolized it in some other fashion. All right. Okay, so now my tool is ready to run. I'm going to hit example 1. I'm going to choose C-Tracks for the first one. I'm going to choose Watershed for the second one. And I'm going to choose Dissolve Field. It's going to be Huck 8. And I'm going to save it in the same directory that I've been saving it. Trying to find the lab data, and I'm going to call it output. Okay, so notice that I didn't need to set override output. It handled that for me, and it has this little yellow exclamation point. You might have a red exclamation point here on your screen. If you do, it's because you don't have geoprocessing options, override output of geoprocessing operation. See, if I uncheck that and I say OK, I don't know if it's going to retroactively go back and check that. Let's see if it does. No, it doesn't. Well, let me choose it again. Yep, see now it's red. It's a little red guy, and it's not going to let me run it. But if I change it to overwrite, and it looks like it doesn't retroactively check it, so I just have to select it again. So now it's going to let me overwrite it. So I don't have to specify override output in my script. What's kind of weird is if you specify override output in your script, no matter what they have selected, it forces it to be override output. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say OK. This is going to run, and you see it's getting my messages. It's getting the intersecting C-Tracks and watersheds, dissolving layer, completed script, and here's the output. It worked. It ran. And so I ran a simple tool inside of ArcGIS. A simple tool. I still got to see my messages. It took about 2.27 seconds. One of the nice things is that when you run it inside of ArcGIS, it takes a little bit less time because ArcGIS is already running, so it doesn't have to check that license and take forever. So it ran, and it produced the result that I wanted it to produce. All right. I think there's still a little bit of maybe confusion on this. Oh, let me add that back in, outputs. So let's say that I went to symbology.
Message, if you wanted to, could you add some carriage returns to add some white space so your messages are a little bit easier to see?
You could add, you have to add them using the Python syntax, the /n, to make a new line, a blank line. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So if I just change this to categories, add all values, set OK. So now it's going to look like this. If I were to save this as a layer file, it's going to put it there in ctemp for now. If I was to change this, under symbology, I specify that output layer. Now, if I get rid of this, and even if I get rid of the, even if I get rid of the file that I used, the dummy file that I used to create it, so if I go into here, see, I'm going to get rid of output. It doesn't exist anymore. And I'm going to open up the file I just created, which was ctemp. And then I'll open this up and put this over here. See how I get a little red exclamation point? Doesn't exist. Doesn't matter, because it's going to put in that data. When I try to run this, it's going to put the data in there. So now every time I run it, the output's going to be symbolized like that. So that's a way to symbolize your data in a nice way, so that it's always symbolized after it runs. So if your analysis actually produced something that showed population by county or something, you could have it displayed using that variable. It might be easier for a user. That's what that one's for. Okay. So let's look at the script that we created last week, because that's the script that you're going to have to you're going to have to change. So I'm going to open up that file from last week, week 5. One open. All right. So my script is, I left it open, so it's not done yet. But we're still going to talk about what you need to do to modify this script. And remember what I said, you don't want the user, you usually don't want to override the user's wishes on the workspace or the override output. So, so you probably want to get rid of these. But more importantly, what you want to do is acquire all of the inputs that you need to run this. So what are those inputs? Well, you need the census tract data, and we don't have it yet, but you need the watershed data. So that's almost going to be the same code that I just went over, for today's example. So here you're going to get the watershed, you're going to get the census tract. Okay. Now, do you need to get this original area field from the user? No, because that was just part of our logic. That's a temporary field that you created along the way, right? But what field would be nice to get from the user? What field are we manipulating to give us, at the end, we have a new what field? Remember that, let's go back and look at the population. Who said that? Teresa, good job. That's what we need. We want to, because we're apportioning a field. And if we want to kind of generalize this tool so that it runs no matter what we're apportioning, whether we're apportioning turtles or dogs or people or money or whatever, we're apportioning people by area. So another way to say that is we're apportioning X by area. Even if it's always people, in some data sets, the field that represents the number of people might be called something else. It might be called population 2010 one time, and we might be dealing with 2000 data another time, so it might be called population 2000. And so it would be good to get that field from the user and ask, what's the population field that I need to apportion? Okay? And so that field needs to be gotten from the user. So we need to be able to say get the field, that field parameter. And so this field doesn't necessarily need to be gotten from the user. That can be hard coded in. But the field where we, basically this old pop field, we need to ask the user, where's the old pop field? We could, I think it would be polite to ask the user what they want to call the new population field. So we could ask the user for that, but that would just be a string. So when we created it in our toolbox, we would ask for a string. So we got that. Actually, let's write down all the things. So far we said the two data sets. Well, let's write them down as data set 1, data set 2. I'm actually going to write feature class. And they actually matter in this scenario. So feature class 1, we're going to say represents the items to be split. And then feature class 2 represents the regions to split into. I'm going to say, okay. So we need to obtain the field 1 is going to be the regions of, the field in FC1 that represents the items to split. Okay. Field 2 will be the new field that represents the the total of the items once reapportioned by area, maybe. Okay? I can think of one other thing that two other things that we probably want to feed it. One being the output, but there's one more besides that. The reapportioned data set. So one other thing. Okay? And I think somebody already said it. They were just getting ahead of me. I think it was somebody on the coast. They said something about the dissolve field. So we want them to specify what field we want to re-summarize everything by. Okay? In other words, the dissolve field. In this one, it was the watersheds. Remember, the field, the unique field that represented the watershed. So we need another field. Field 3, and this one is the field in FC2 that represents the items to summarize by. So this one becomes the dissolve field in practice. Field 3 becomes the dissolve field. Field 1 is the population, whatever population field that is. And field 2 is the output, the new population value. You could tell the user, we're going to call it this for you. But you could also let the user specify it. Probably a good compromise is to actually let the user specify that, but provide a default name. All right, so your toolbox is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values that you need to put in there. Now let's go through and think about what each field needs to be, what data type they all need to be. Okay? So I'll put that right here. What data type does feature class 1 need to be? Well, I called it a feature class, so. But could it be something else that might work just fine that I talked about 10 minutes ago? Feature layer, yeah. So I would actually make it a feature layer. Okay, what about this one? Same, right? All right, now what about this one right here? The field in feature class 1 that represents items split. What data type should it be? It's like in this one, properties, there it is. See, it's a data type field. Okay. So you're going to have to write field, and that's fine. And then you can actually do obtained from. Obtained from what? Which one should it be obtained from? Right, census, but which one of these two is it? Which one of these two is census, by the way? Yeah, input 1 is the census. So it's obtained from FC1. So that way it'll always get a field from that file. Okay, so the new field that represents the total of the items reapportioned, what data type does that need to be? This is actually a little bit more flexible. Oh, we should also specify whether these are inputs or outputs. We can do that in a second. Okay, next one. The new field that represents the total of the items once reapportioned by the area. Once they are reapportioned by area. Now, field kind of makes sense, right? But string will work just fine because we're letting the user choose this and they're just typing something in. Okay? So, what really matters though is whether or not this is an input or an output. Okay. Yes, yeah, exactly. It is an output. Okay. Now, if we didn't want the user to select, if we didn't want the user to name it, we could still provide it as an output, and in that case, we would make it a derived, but we're not going to, we're making it an output. They can choose field or string, but we don't need to write obtain from or anything like that. So either one of those will work, field or string. Okay, the field in feature class 2 that represents the items to be summarized by, that's a field, and this time it's going to be obtained from summarized by, no, it's going to be obtained from feature class 2. You're right that it's actually, we're actually going to feed it to the output, but the field will be named the same thing in here as it was in there. And ArcGIS doesn't know what the field's names were yet for the output. So we have to obtain it from feature class 2. And then the reapportioned data set is going to be just like this reapportioned, this output. It's going to be output, and it's going to be a feature class. It has to be a feature class. It can't be a feature layer. Even though that's what I just said. Sorry. Okay. Whoops. All right. I'm going to save this as.
So when you did that last line of code there, and it's run, that's going to generate a blank line in the tool so that they can type in a file name, that output.
This one right here? Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, because that's an output. It's basically, that's the exact same as this last one right here. We could call it output feature class, whatever. In fact, you could, well, let's just do this. So we could start this off by right-clicking on this and saying copy, and then pasting this here and expanding on it. So if we go back into properties, we want to change the name, and we'll call this, we'll call it 2018 Rayber 6-1. So we need to change the source to whatever our source is going to be. So right now I'm just going to leave that there. And then this is what we want to change. So we want to change this to reflect this. So far, 1 and 2 are already fine. Those are the inputs. Okay? The field in feature class 1 that represents the items. So we need to change this. Well, here, I'll show you how you can add a new one. So if we want to call this, let's just call it pop field. Or, because there's no reason why we can't make it population field. And we'll call this, a field. A, B, C, D, F, G. Field. And where do we need to obtain it from again? This is the population field. Feature class 1 or 2? 1. Right? So now we're all set. If we want to move this up to put it in the right place, we can just do that. And hey, if you decide that population field is better right after the population data set, in fact, if you want to call this population data set, you can. As I said, these names don't get transferred into your code at all. So you can make these as descriptive and helpful to the user as you want. So that might be good. Okay, then we're going to add dissolve field is already going to be the second one. Then we're actually the third one here. That's field 3. The field in feature class 3 that represents the items to summarize by field. So that's the dissolve field, basically. So, and we already have that as getting it from input 2. So we could call this the summary layer, the summary data set, and then call that the summary field. Okay, that just sounds a little straightforward. So we still have 2 more things to put in. Well, we already have the output, so we're set there. And the last one is the field, the new summary field. Actually, I'm just going to call this a new population field. You could call it the apportioned population field if you wanted to. And if you make this a field, see how I made it a field? If you make that a field, and you don't specify obtain from, the user can put whatever they want in there, as long as it's a valid field name. Which there are restrictions, but they're not that many. So I say, okay. Oh, I'm going to move this up so that I put it. I don't know if it makes more sense right there. It kind of makes sense right there, I think. I've got the population data set, the population field, the summary data set, the summary field, the output, and the new population field. Oh, I need to change this though. This has to be not an input, it has to be an output if I want them to be able to specify whatever they want in there. That's an output. Actually, let me think. Actually, I'm not sure that it matters. As long as you don't say derived, it has to be required. Okay, it looks like it's making it derived, so make it an input. It has to be an input. So that's fine. It is the field that gets created, but we're not deriving it. So that's kind of why it's an input, because we're putting it into the model and we're creating that. So that's an input. Whereas output is an output, because if people want to use that in later models, they can. All right. So if I hit OK here, I've made some changes to the name that are going to show up. Oh, your names also cannot have underscores. They can't have underscores or spaces. I said they couldn't have spaces before, but they can't have underscores either. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I have this tool over here. If I try to run it, it's not going to work because it's still using the old script. So your job is to hook up this model with your new script. So remember, this is parameter 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I put these in a different order, they'd be in a different order in my script. All right, so once you're...
Say that again, so the order that we put in our toolbox has to match the order in the script?
That's exactly right. That's the only method of passing it. So they aren't passed by a name in ArcGIS. So the order that they show up here, and if you change them, it will feed them in a different order. It's just using those sys.rd. That's what it's really using in the background. So in the background, it's actually using those values. So if you move these around, it's feeding it in a different place. And if your program is expecting it to be in a different place, it will fail. Okay? So if you get your script working, and then you get your tool working, and then you change one of the locations of the parameters, it will fail until you actually go change your script and move the same thing in the same place. All right, so that's what you need to do to finish it off. And I've created a place to turn it in. So what do you need to turn in? For this one, all you need to do is turn in. Well, you need to turn in your toolbox and your script. You can turn them in as two separate files, or you can zip them together, which is how I usually share toolboxes, by putting the script and the toolbox in the folder, zipping them together, and sending them to people, or uploading them, whatever. Okay, so that's what you need to do. Just get it working, and it should work. All right, I'm going to stop this because I'm getting low on disk